And as we're closing a year, we're coming to look towards a new year. And this has been some time for me to reflect. Last year would be our first full calendar year as Narrative Church. It's been a God-directed adventure that we've called Narrative Church. And I've been stirred to pray and consider what's ahead for 2024. And based upon some of my own thoughts and some conversations I've had with people, there's 3 areas that have stood out to me in my heart to reflect on and consider as we're closing one year and we're heading into a new one. And the first is, what is my role as a pastor? What exactly did I step into, and what is this becoming? Over the years before I became a pastor here, I had come to believe that the role of a pastor is actually fluid. While the overarching idea might very generally be considered that a pastor is a spiritual leader under God, what it looks like for the role of a pastor across time and culture varies. It also varies greatly according to each pastor as a person, depending on what their experiences are and where they're gifted. And the role of pastors vary greatly according to the current state and need of the church at large, such as the American church. My experience from pastoring Narrative so far it's solidified my belief that the role of a pastor is very fluid from each person and even over time. So when I reflect on and consider for the future, what is my role as a pastor, I'm not asking, what is the Bible role of a pastor in some cookie cutter shape that everyone must conform to? I'm asking, given what has shaped me, given where I am in history, in geography, in demographics, and given the evidence of what God is doing here and now, what is my personal, unique role as a pastor, specifically at Narrative Church right now? What I've found so far is that my role is something that has actually always been in my heart for many years. I felt it for years before becoming a pastor, and it's through experience, though, that I've come to be able to put some words to it. My role is one, to bring my unique voice. To borrow the words of author and theologian Dostoevsky, my voice is grounded, my personal voice. My voice is grounded in a faith that is not like a child. My Hosanna, my faith, has passed through a vast furnace of doubt. My role is to offer a faith that has been uniquely shaped by experiences and questions that many pastors gloss over, have never considered, or I believe simply regurgitate some worn out answers to. Building on this, my role as a pastor is to lead in authenticity. I can't remember who said it, but these words ring true for me. The preacher doesn't have to resolve all the anomalies of the Christian faith, but must face them honestly and offer some path through them. The truth, after all, is supposed to set us free. A church is so much more energized and honest if it's a place where the difficult things are talked about, rather than suppressed or evaded. A congregation doesn't expect its preacher to have all the commentaries or studied with all the great philosophers, thank God. But it does. The church does expect its preacher to have been to the bottom of the pond of faith and doubt and faced the most challenging questions and to have something to show for it. This is what I would want in a pastor. And if there's times when I have nothing else to offer you, I can tell you that I have this to offer you. I have been crushed. I have been to the bottom of faith. I have been through doubt. I have been through the furnace. And I can authentically offer you that. So my role, as I've seen at this point, consists of authentically bringing you my forged faith and the insights that it has provided me. Specifically, foundationally, that the nature of God is love. For this reason, while I hate labels, I fall into the camp of what is called relational theology. The basic premise is that God is love, and love is completed and finalized. It is realized in the experience of a relationship, not the impartation of just information. Love, at its essence, is relational. And I believe that my role as a pastor is to share my hard-fought, my tested, and my proven relationship with God, and invite you into relationship with Him as well. The second thing that I've considered is, what is the role of our Sunday service? There's a thing called liturgy. And in its broadest sense, it speaks to simply the form or formula that a church service takes. That's liturgy at its most basic. I remember part of my introduction so many years ago to charismatic Christianity was the claim that they are not liturgical. We're always dynamic. We're always new, and it's exciting. Things are fresh here. And we work to be even fresher every day. And in Bible college, the question was asked, how do we get away from liturgy? We don't want liturgy. Liturgy is repetitive and boring. How do we get away from liturgy? And some student in the back of the class might raise their hand and say, well, you see, what we could do when people walk in on a Sunday morning. You're already doing liturgy. If you have in your formula, we're going to meet on a Sunday morning. That is liturgy. That is a form or formula that your church is taking. And even if you choose to meet on some unique time, let's do Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Nobody else is doing it. Well, guess what? Now for your church, that is your liturgy. That is your formula that you have just created. Ultimately, there's been a reactive push against the idea of liturgy because the beauty of liturgy has been lost. And what happens then is that liturgy becomes a rut. And very often it becomes a program within which people get trapped. Even saying that we're never going to do anything the same. We're going to meet on random days at random times, never do anything the same. That becomes your liturgy. Your church formula is now chaos. That's your liturgy. And that too can become its own rut and its program that can own you and trap you when you're trying to figure out how to do everything randomly. I stepped into this pastoring thing not wanting to fall into the trap of a program of a service, where the program is empty repetition or chaos. I've seen the pressure that the program brings to a church, that we have to do things a certain way, and This is how we do it, and we got to meet expectations because this is what people expect. The program elevates the doers of the program to performers. And it lowers the attendees of the program to observers. I brought some ideas with me to the church that have become part of our liturgy. I've also had the chance to sit and see what develops over time in our church. All along the way, I've attempted over everything else to try to avoid the pressure of a program. We generally do 3 songs in the morning, and then we end with 1 song. Nate had a show last night. Nate has a show tonight. Nate's voice gets strained. So guess what? We did 2 songs this morning because we don't have that pressure. We can flex as needed. What's been brought to our church, the role of our Sunday service, is that we have a beautiful liturgy at Narrative Church. I brought to this service, or continued, things like annual Advent Sundays. This is part of our annual formula that we will celebrate Advent. This is our 2nd year. We meet on a Sunday morning. This is a liturgy common to tons of churches. We tend to open with prayer. This again is a liturgy common to many churches. Although our call most week to consciously become aware of the anxieties that we're carrying into the service, to take a breath, to become aware of where we are in the moment. That's something that has uniquely become part of narrative liturgy. We open with a time of worship and music, and we close with a time of worship and music. Again, this is common in a lot of churches, but just because it's common doesn't mean it's bad. Reducing it to, it's just what we do, that's when it's bad, because it now becomes our program. But when we don't reduce it, when we consider the beauty of the liturgy, that we are inviting the power of music to open and close our service. And in the power of music, we first worship God before we attempt to hear from Him. And then, no matter the message, we generally end with the power of music to again worship God. This is part of our meaningful liturgy, no matter why other churches do it. Donut, as a part of service, is something that happened organically. I brought donuts to the very first service that we did as the birth of Narrative Church in 2022, and there's never been a Sunday service since where we have not had donuts. I never knew it would go like this. But it's great. What I have heard from you is that it's what those donuts have come to mean in our beautiful liturgy. The donuts mean that our service is not just a program. We come, we sit down, we attend, and we leave. What we do here, from the time we open in here, in prayer, until we close with the last song, is only part of a bigger communal Sunday event that is built around relationship and engagement. And those donuts are a symbol of that, because those donuts are what we gather around, even beyond just this piece. So the donuts are part of our liturgy that many have said, don't make them go away. Not just because I want a donut in the morning, but it means something. It means something to our church. That is part of our liturgy, part of our formula for what is meaningful and beautiful in Narrative Church. These are items that are in our liturgy without the pressure of a program that we have to do. And so we get to generally hold on to our beautiful liturgy that has emerged here at Narrative Church. we can shift our liturgy over time to remove something if it's something that is no longer beautiful to us, if it's something that just becomes what we do, but it just needs to go away. And we can add something else as we evolve as a community. We can flex our liturgy, as sometimes things just don't work out each week like we thought they would. And so something doesn't happen that normally otherwise happens. Or we can flex our liturgy as the Spirit of God moves, and we need to make room for God to do something different because we're not holding on to a program with a fist. As it has developed, as I've reflected on what has been the role of our Sunday service for Narrative Church, the role has been a steady but flexible time to meet as a community that has become a safe place for people to enter that doesn't feel dangerous, chaotic, or unknown. The Sunday service has become the highlight to look forward to at the end of a week, even if it's a hard week. And for many, the Sunday service has become what the Bible calls a mountaintop moment, where we get to rise above regular life for a time to meet with God spiritually and through other people, to be refreshed before we must descend back into the life of another week. The role of the Sunday service has become a beautiful liturgy for Narrative. Finally, the third thing and most applicable to 2024 that I've considered and reflected on is, what does it mean to be called Narrative Church? Narratives are powerful things that trap us. They limit our thinking and they blind us to broader horizons of thought. One of my favorite examples of the power of narrative comes from a time in Bible college. A foundational narrative of the Bible college that I attended was to see God as an extreme punisher of sin. And Jesus came to highlight our sinfulness, especially by the contrast of living a perfect life. And Jesus came with the threat of hell. And ultimately, he was crushed by God in order to bring justice to our sins. Sin and everything to do with sin was a focal point of the college's narrative. It's not to say that sin's not an important thing. It's not to say that there's not a lot to talk about in all of this, but it was an extreme focal point of the Bible college I went to. And it was a fearful narrative. It was a narrative that caused you to always wonder, where am I messing up? Where am I sinning? Where is God angry at me? So in our studies at college, we came to the story of the woman at the well in John chapter 4, and I'll summarize the story for you. At one point in his ministry, Jesus had to travel through Samaria, where the Samaritans lived. Samaria, Samaritans. It starts to make sense, right? And so he's traveling through where the Samaritans lived, and long story short, the Jews and the Samaritans did not like each other. You could say they hated each other. It went to that level. And Jesus, he's traveling by Samaria, he's traveling through Samaria at a certain time of day, and he's tired. So he goes to rest by a well while his disciples go into town to buy some food. Out comes a Samaritan woman to get some water from the well, and Jesus asks her, "Would you draw some water for me? Would you give me some water?" And the woman is shocked that a Jewish man would ever dare to speak to a Samaritan woman, let alone be willing to take something from her, take water from her. Their conversation moves to water that Jesus can offer her. This is spiritual water. This is spiritual refreshment. And in this conversation, Jesus tells the woman to go get her husband and bring him back. The woman tells Jesus that she has no husband. Jesus replies, "You've answered truthfully. You have no husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not even your husband." Now, when your narrative is sin-focused, and the God of your narrative is sin-focused, how do you think the story is going to be taught? Is going to be taught that the woman is a sinner. I'll tell you how Bible college taught it, and many will teach the passage this way. What Jesus just did was called out this woman's sin that she tried to hide. "Oh, I don't have a husband." "Oh, you're right. You've had 5, and the man you're with now, you're not even married to him." It was taught that she's an adulterer who moved from man to man in marriage until she finally didn't even care anymore and is now just willing to live just fully sinful and not even be married to the man she's with now. And in the story, while many Bibles will say that Jesus came there at noon to the well, the time of day referenced in the passage could actually refer to 6 a.m., to noon, or to 6 p.m. But it reinforces the sin narrative of this woman to interpret it at noon, because that's the hottest part of the day when nobody else would be going to draw water. You're not going to lug around heavy jugs of water at the hottest part of the day. So of course, it must be noon. This is when the shameful whore slunk out to go get water because she knew that she wouldn't run into any other women there and be embarrassed because she's a sinner. The sin obsession is read into this story, and the young students, they take their notes from which many will then preach later and continue this idea of the story. And Jesus is reinforced as a fearful judge from whom this woman tried to hide her sin. But Jesus knows everything, and you should be ashamed and you should be scared. You cannot hide anything from Jesus. With this reading, the sin-focused narrative grows, and it colors more passages. Never mind that once we get outside the box of a sin-centered narrative, Jesus could be offering the water of spiritual renewal to a 5 times widowed woman, so broken from continual loss that she wants the love of a man but cannot bear to get married again. Or, never mind that in this woman's day, a certificate of divorce had to come from the man. So this woman has really been divorced by men. She has been abandoned by men 5 times. In her day, a man could divorce a woman if she failed to produce children within a year of marriage. So not only could this woman have been abandoned 5 times by men, but due to infertility, that the stigma of the day was that was a curse of God, she now lives with a stigma on top of abandonment. She's been stigmatized and abandoned 5 times. Now having no man who will marry her now. But in a patriarchal society, she is still forced to give herself to a man in order to make it through life. What it appears like in this story is not that Jesus is saying, aha, I know the secret, I know the dirty secrets of your life. You're a filthy woman. But that Jesus is saying, I know your painful situation. That either through death or abandonment or just searching for love that nobody can give you, you've been unable to find love. And having given up on love, you're now just with a man for survival. There's a very good chance that, given an opportunity for a neutral reading of this passage, the students in Bible college may not have come to the adulterous conclusion of this woman. They may have instead realized that it's more like Jesus to speak to and empathize with our pain. But narratives are powerful things. And once you're given the narrative to read the story a certain way, it is very difficult to break out of that narrative. There's numerous passages in Scripture where the narrative we have been given can make it nearly impossible for us to see that there are other plausible ways to read it. The power of narrative expands to our lives as before we even have a chance, while we are even still kids, we are often handed narratives about ourselves that distort how we see ourselves. The narratives can begin that I wasn't worth enough for my dad to stick around. And my mom even tells me the reason your dad left is because of you. Everything was good until you came along. And I can't see anything else but the narrative that I've been handed. And my life, I don't aspire to much because I don't see that I'm worth much. The narrative can be that when someone blows up at me all the time and tells me it's your fault, I begin to believe it's my fault when people get mad at me. And the story of my life can then become that I am guilt-ridden. I am trained to think that all that goes wrong is my fault. And I carry a weight from the narrative of guilt. The narrative can be that I can't trust anyone. So I'd better be willing to fight for every scrap out there. And the story of my life becomes even the selling of my closest friends for a little bit more security, because I've been given a narrative of insecurity. The power of narratives expands to our world. The narrative that we should be terrified of them. Let me tell you the narrative of the world. They are the bad people. Your kids are in danger from them. Your way of life is going to come to an end because of them. And my story better be an anxious one, because I need to be afraid of all of them. The narratives, they seek to land their claws on us, latch their claws into us, and they often play off one another, never ending, and even becoming multi-layered. My constant prayer for Narrative Church, as I've looked at the crescendo of narratives being offered and inflicted upon us in the 21st century, my constant prayer is that Narrative Church will become a bastion, a place of protection, where we hold safe the alternative, authentic narrative of God. It's the narrative out of which creation was born. It's the narrative out of which creation is sustained. It's the narrative through which everything is heading to where we read that God will be all in all. It's a narrative of love so great that it moves God himself to descend, to live with us, sweat with us, bleed with us. It's a story of love so enchanting and rich that it will take our lifetime and more to fully appreciate the details. It's a narrative that changes everything, and before which all other narratives will be destroyed. But for all its grandeur, it's also a very simple narrative. It's a simple story because it's a story of love. And love is not complicated. Eugene Peterson, he encapsulated this narrative perfectly. Eugene was a pastor, he was a scholar, a poet, who wrote some very incredible books. And he was connected to the heart of God in a very special way. At Eugene's funeral, his son told everyone that his dad had fooled them all. All through Eugene's 29 years of ministry, he said, he has fooled you. For all the sermons Eugene gave, for all the dozens of books that Eugene wrote, his son told them that Eugene only had one narrative to tell. It was this narrative, it was this message that Eugene had begun whispering over his young son at night when he's falling asleep. It was a story or a narrative that Eugene would continue to tell his son for 50 years. That single message, cloaked in hundreds of sermons and dozens of books, was: God loves you. God is on your side. He's coming after you, and he is relentless. That was his father's single message. It's the narrative of God's love. 2023 for us was the year of an idea. I drew our attention to the idea of the speed of 3 miles per hour. It's God's speed. It's the speed at which Jesus patiently walked with and taught his disciples as they traveled. And we marked last year, we marked 2023, the year that's ending, as a year where we become mindful of God's speed. He is slow. He is patient. It's the speed of love. And we walk this speed in the face of a world of hurry. Let me show you how to hurry your church up to 500 people. Let me show you how to get to this and get to this and get to this in 3 months, 6 months, a year. Let's set these mile markers. But we walked 3 miles an hour through 2023. We walked this speed as a church family of love, where many of us, including myself, have found healing and growth. The idea of 2023 is an idea that we must continue to carry with us. But if 2023 was the year of an idea, 2024, for me, for Narrative Church, is the year of a prayer. It is my constant prayer that against all the narratives given through abuse, narratives of war, of election cycles, of fear, of death, against all the narratives that already have their claws in us, and others that are attempting to fight over us. My prayer is the Narrative Church will stand as a shelter in the storm, a place of rest and healing. My prayer for this year is that we will be solidified and established in the embrace of the narrative of love. This is a narrative that doesn't seek to embed its claws on you because it is not predatory. The narrative of love is a narrative, the story of two outstretched hands, much like our own, that were indelibly imaged into history as pinned forever, open on a cross, inviting us in love, expressed in forgiveness. This is my prayer for our church. I want to close 2024 with communion. If you need communion, would you raise your hand? Some may have come in late and missed it. We need some communion over here. Thank you. As communion is being handed out, what an incredible year it's been. I look forward to continuing at 3 miles per hour as we now look at what it means to be Narrative Church. As I put words to my role of a pastor, to offer you my forged faith that has been through the hardest of times. And I look forward to very often, we don't always get it done, but very often I look forward to taking communion with you. Because communion is the narrative recentering. Every time we take communion, we recenter on the narrative of love. And we come to the bread. Here in the bread is the memory of Jesus' body that carried God's narrative into history for us. Let's take the bread. And in the cup is the memory of blood that was poured out to destroy and drown out any other narrative but this one. God loves you. God is on your side. He is coming for you, and he is relentless. Let's take the cup.